Okay, so this is just going to be a short video about, this is a reference video, so I need you to go watch the game Theorists, the Deltarune theory that MatPat just released, and watch that. Make sure you get the whole story about what's going on and what his theory is. I have some things I want to add to that, just like thoughts and ideas. So, now that that part is done, I wanted to just give some thoughts about what I think of this whole thing. I pointed out first that I thought that it kind of made sense. So, like, in like Deltarune, you can't do a genocide run, like quotations around genocide. You can't kill anybody in this underground or this place that Kris and Susie play in. And I think that's because, well, Kris is the DM. And I think the reason why they don't allow characters to be killed is because of Ralsei, and because it would upset Asriel. Like, basically, if Kris upsets Ralsei, that's upsetting Asriel. And he does not want to, and they do not want to upset Asriel. So they can make it so that, like, Susie gets her side where she gets to attack them, but they don't die. So she gets to relieve her aggression towards the characters, but they're not killed, so that way Asriel is still, or Ralsei is still pleased. And that's why I think that you can't do a genocide run, because Kris doesn't want to disappoint Asriel or Ralsei. And stuff like that. I think that's why they choose to make all the characters flee. And it's just kind of weird because, like, at some parts, I'm doing, like, a thing where I'm attacking all of the characters to see what happens. And it seems like Ralsei doesn't really notice that he's attacking, because I think that's Kris trying to keep him in his good nature, even though they're the ones making Ralsei do this. And I think that's part of the whole innocent thing that Kris wants Asriel to be like in his world. Like, that's the way they want to imagine Asriel, because they're imagining Asriel as they want to imagine him. They portray him as this character that, as MatPat says, as this character who needs Kris. He's the one that he protects. Like, Kris protects Asriel, or protects Ralsei in this case scenario. And he needs him. Like, he has no life besides when he meets Kris. And that's the kind of relationship that he is ideal for Kris. And so that's why, like, the whole thing with Ralsei, I think that's why you can't do a genocide run. But I do have, like, this idea in my head that the ending scene, the iconic one where Kris, rips out their soul and then throws it in the cage and then pulls out a knife. To me, that could mean two different things. It could be an eternal, like, I'm hiding my emotions and I'm shutting everybody out and I am, like, isolating myself. That's the kind of thing that my friend, he was the one that kind of, helped me introduce this idea. He was like, yeah, that makes the most sense to me, because it's more like a thing, it's more of like a physical representation of Kris hiding themselves from the world and not talking about their problems. Hiding her soul away and becoming this, like, body that just doesn't care anymore. But another part of me is also like, what if this is, it is the whole, like, hiding your emotions thing, but what if this turns into a aggression kind of deal? Like, Kris becomes angry, because there's the 5 stages of grief, and it's not about death, it's about, like, moving on and healing. And of course there's always going to be some regret, some anger, some sadness, some, guilt, some like, putting blame on other people, like, it's your fault, Asriel, that you left me. Like, there's that whole stage, and I think that's what they're experiencing, like, the sadness, which is like, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to do anything, I can't feel anything anymore, it feels like I'm limp. And then now it's like the next phase, it's like they're experiencing this anger. And then I think that's why when they say we're gonna go back, I wonder if they're gonna go and you have to play a genocide, or, as MatPat says it, an aggressive route, where you have no choice but to kill everything, because that's how Kris feels. Because this world is run by how Kris feels. And that's how we know that, because of all the evidence that MatPat points out, that this world is mostly run by Kris. All of the stuff connects and makes sense. But if Kris, like, if you're a DM, this is a bit different because this is emotional support. This is not playing to play. This is playing to cope. If you're playing to play, if you're a DM, you'll try to be a decent DM that gives a fair chance to everybody. You know, everybody gets a choice, everybody gets to do a little bit of what they want to do, and everybody gets a slice of the adventure. But it's a bit different with Kris, because Kris is doing this because they're trying to cope with the sadness that they're experiencing. So if he's the DM and he comes in and he's absolutely upset and frustrated, that's going to reflect his DM world. That's going to reflect his personality as this character. He could change everything, or they could change everything if they wanted to. It's just up to them. And, you know, they can change the way they look, they can change the way the monsters act, they can change everything. And Susie is simply just a person in this world that they've created. And Susie is playing along to help relieve with her stuff too. And I'm just saying that, like, with the whole knife thing, that was an indication to me that, like, okay, this is Kris having anger, like being furious, letting the anger get to her, or get to them. Because I know, like, you experience, like, guilt, like, this is my fault, and then you put the blame, and then you get the anger, it's just you're angry at whoever, and you can't stop it sometimes. And to me, it seems like this whole world is run Kris. So if Kris, depending on how Kris feels, it's about how the world goes. And Susie plays along as well, because it helps her, even if it's not, like, you know, perfect. It still is a way to cope without doing any more damage to anybody in the real world. So, yeah. And there was something that confused me, like, MatPat was saying that, like, Kris was afraid to go back to the closet where they used to play because it made them relive, like, memories that are hard to experience now that Azriel is gone. But it's like, why would he go back? Or why would they go back to the closet if it brings bad memories for them? And it kind of connects, like, the next thing. It's like, when was this decided? When was Susie and Kris gonna be like, okay, let's just go magically play D&D all of a sudden? Like, from what we know, this is strictly from what we know. You have to understand that this is from what I know, from what we know. I could be wrong. Kris and Susie don't have a relationship. There's nothing really, except for what we experience at the start of the game. There's no evidence that we know Susie more than just our school bully quotation marks around that. And it just doesn't make sense to me how they're gonna go get chalk in a closet and then they just start playing D&D. Like, when did this happen? And how did it happen so quickly? How did all of a sudden the door shuts and they just go play D&D? It could also be like, you know, maybe they knew about it before we were able to, like, see, like, they knew about it beforehand, and they didn't actually go to the closet to get chalk. They went to go play D&D. And they're not, you know, it's not like, maybe they have some kind of relationship before that, like, Susie and Kris talked a little bit, but the way it looked, it seemed like they really didn't know each other, or they really didn't have any type of friendship or even acquaintances to that point. So that part just confused me. Like, when did they make this decision? Like, when all of a sudden was Susie interested in anything Kris had to say? You know, she thinks they're a freak. She thinks that, you know, she's probably jealous. Like, I don't think that's an unfair assumption. She was literally going to kill Kris, but she felt bad for them because, and they quote, "You've got a good mother. I'd hate to see her have to bury her own child." Like, that's obviously some jealousy towards the mother that maybe Susie doesn't have. And, you know, she doesn't want to, like, have that happen to a good person. And that's the part where it's like, okay, there's obviously something going on here. Like, you know, Susie feels this jealousy for their mom. And, you know, Kris doesn't really see that. They see it more as like, oh, they hate me. They don't love me anymore. They don't care about me. They don't blah, blah, blah. All these things that you feel when you're overwhelmed with emotions and stuff like that. So that part just didn't make sense to me. And then there was another thing, like, if Kris is the DM, why is the element of no choice a thing? Because if Kris is the DM of the game, shouldn't that mean that they have the ability to make choices as well? Because while you don't have the ability to always make choices in the real world, but when you're in a game, Kris doesn't have the ability to take charge of their own world. And like I said, I think that's a bit understandable because Susie is very assertive, and Kris is probably a bit afraid to be like, okay, no, we're playing this my way. Like, they're just more willing to go along with what Susie is doing, but they're still running the game, you feel me? But still, I think there's like, that's kind of to me like, okay, imagine you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and you're the DM. All of a sudden, your players just stop listening to you. They all start going their own ways, and you have no control. Imagine that in that situation as Kris and Susie. That would be to me kind of what is happening. Like, Susie is trying to do her own thing, but Kris is the DM, so they can only allow so much to happen when Susie goes off on her own, you know. And of course they still connect back to the story somehow, because like in most D&D, you can have your little play sessions, but you always most of the time come back to your group, you know, Ralsei and Kris, but they don't get anything else in that regard. So that kind of confused me, because I'm like, if Kris is the DM, why don't they get the element of choice? If anything, they should have the most choice in the game, because they are the DM. And while like Ralsei, like, you know, mental blocks, like, I don't want to break my code for like Ralsei, that's like a personal thing. But the ability to say certain things are cut off because Susie won't allow them to make a decision is not exactly like how playing Dungeons and Dragons is. And Dungeons and Dragons is just the easiest way to connect all of this for it to make the most sense. But it's mostly just playing as an imaginary world, where in some regards you could, if we're not connecting this to D&D, you could say they're both the DM, which would make more sense. But I'm just saying that this DM position kind of seems to juggle around, like, we're in Kris's world, but yet Susie gets to make all the decisions. Like, it's kind of confusing who is really the person that is ruling the world. Because, you know, Susie plays this character like, oh, I make all the decisions, you don't get any decisions. But Kris is the person that makes the world, so that part confuses me. And also, like, the other thing was, like, when they finished their session, and the lights turned on, why did Susie seem so confused? If this was, like, a D&D session, why did she seem so lost as to exactly what they were doing? Or almost like she can't even comprehend what just happened, even though she experienced the whole game and she was playing in it. That's the part that confuses me, because if you're playing D&D, you know what you're doing. You're making your decisions. But Susie almost seemed like she blacked out for like an hour or something like that, and then all of a sudden just woke up again, and she's like, where am I? What are we doing here? And there's like the thing where it's like, how were they in the closet and how did they end up in the other room? And to me, that's like, you know, when you're in that blackout, you go to another room, like you move rooms to try to change your experience. Like, to me, that's kind of like, that's like a black moment where you just kind of move, and it's like a transition phase. You don't really get to see that, but that's kind of, to me, what happened. Like, oh, we're done in the closet, now we fell through and we have to go to the next room. Like, that's what makes sense to me. But I don't understand why Susie was so confused. Because in all regards, if she was playing the game, which MatPat says she is, she should know what she's doing. But yet after that, she says, let's go back to that place again tomorrow. And that's where like the conflict is confusing me. Like, she didn't know, but she did know. So I'm kind of lost as to why exactly that happened. Like, why is she so confused at first, but then she says, let's go back again. And when I played this, I was really confused as well, because I was like, okay, maybe this is fake, because it's like, why would we go back to the underground again after we just left? And I say underground because that's just what I called it, but I know that it's not that. Just know if I do say underground, I mean like the fake world, because that just makes sense to me. But I'll try not to say underground because that gets confused. But in this fake world, you know, these characters are all made up. And like I said, the departure that Susie had from all of the characters made no sense. Like, they met and then they're gone. Like, Susie's goodbye was like a casual, like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow, friend. Like, goodbye, I'll see you soon. Like, not like a, oh, I'm leaving and I'll never see you again, like the kind of vibe, you know what I mean? Because, you know, Undertale had that kind of like, you know, really sad, like, goodbye, kid. Like, you could tell because it would pull at your heartstrings. And I know Susie is not an emotional person, but after all she went through with Lancer, I would think that she would be a bit more like emotional that she's leaving this person that she protected. She was willing to compromise with his dad just to be friends with him and to make him happy. You know, she spent a lot of time with him and he accepted her in anything she did. Like, he thought she was so cool. And to me, those things, like, they seem fake because of the way she left. And it's not like she did anything wrong, it's just that the way she was saying her goodbye really made it sound like this was not gonna be the first time this ever happened, you know what I mean? Like, it was gonna happen again, we were gonna see each other again. And Lancer hinted at saying, come back soon, there's always room in town for a couple of clowns. Like, that's a very, like, friendly, like, I'll see you tomorrow kind of thing to say. That's not like a, oh, I'll never see you again, and I'm gonna be really sad, and I'll miss you, and it's like, it makes no sense to me. And I noticed that, I was like, why is this like this? Because I'm never gonna come back again. But, I think the theory that MatPat gave makes the most sense. There's a lot of, he didn't explain anything about the ending of the chapter that will connect to the next days. Like, he explained that the game will kind of play like a week, so like it's like Monday, that's chapter 1, and then the rest of the days will be like the next chapters, and each chapter will lead up to the day when Azrael comes home from college. And that's the kind of thing that he thinks will follow, and that makes the most sense to me. Who knows how long it could go on for? There's really no, like, there's no obvious conflict in the real world. The conflict that's happening is mental, and it's happening because Kris is having the problem. It's not because it's an unstoppable force like drama or something like that. It's because Kris is trying to find a different way to cope with things instead of any other ways. So yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. Thank you for listening, and if you have any ideas about Deltarune, like, theories, please leave them below. I really love theorizing, and I love thinking about stuff and trying to figure out how stuff works, especially in, like, really, really well-developed games. So, yeah, have a good day.